They thought I was still that shivering 16-year-old girl they abandoned at a bus stop 12 years ago, at the hearing for my $3.6 million trust. My stepmother wept fake tears while telling the judge I was a danger to myself. They wanted guardianship, but they made a fatal mistake. When the judge asked for my lawyer's name, I did not just give him a name, I delivered a death sentence to their perfect lives. My name is Lillian Fairbanks, to the outside world. I was the 16-year-old ghost haunting the hallways of a pristine Georgian colonial estate in Connecticut. I was the stain on the silk, the smudge on the crystal, the glitch in the otherwise perfect programming of the Fairbanks family dynasty. My brain does not process sound the way yours does. I have auditory processing disorder, or a PD. It is not that I cannot hear. My hearing is actually acute, almost painful in its precision. The problem lies in the bridge between the ear and the brain. When you speak to me, I hear the noise instantly, but the meaning arrives on a delay, like a foreign film with subtitles that lag 2 seconds behind the action. In a quiet room, I can manage. I can piece the syllables together and respond with adequate speed, but in the chaotic, high-frequency environment of a cocktail party or a family dinner, the world becomes a wall of static. Voices bleed into the hum of the refrigerator, the scratching of silverware, and the ticking of the grandfather clock. To cope, I retreat into silence. I wear noise-canceling headphones that my stepmother, Sylvia, detests with a passion usually reserved for invasive insects. Sylvia often told her guests that I was slow. She would lower her voice to a theatrical whisper, leaning in over her glass of Chardonnay to explain that poor Lillian had developmental issues. She never used the medical term because APD sounded too manageable, too technical. She preferred vague, tragic terms like troubled or mentally fragile. It garnered her more sympathy. She needed to be the saintly stepmother caring for the broken child of her husband's first marriage. My father, Richard, was the CEO of a mid-sized pharmaceutical company that was currently bleeding cash, though he hid it well behind leased luxury cars and tailored Italian suits. He looked at me not with hatred, but with a profound, exhausting disappointment. I was a variable he could not control. Then there was Bella, my half-sister, 14 years old, golden-haired, and possessing the predatory instincts of a velociraptor disguised as a cherub. Bella was the family project, the one designed to marry well and keep the Fairbanks name in the society columns for the right reasons. I was the opposite. I was the girl who spent hours in the library, organizing books by the Dewey Decimal System, because the order calmed the chaos in my head. While my auditory processing was a mess, my visual memory was flawless. I could look at a page of text for 10 seconds and recite it backward. I could remember the exact placement of every object in a room. I noticed when a vase was moved 2 inches to the left. I noticed when the numbers in my father's ledger did not align. The fracture in our fragile household ecosystem began 3 weeks after my grandmother died. She was my father's mother, and the only person who had ever looked at me without wincing. When she passed, the house felt colder, as if the insulation had been stripped from the walls. I knew there was a will. I had seen the lawyer's car in the driveway, a sleek black sedan that smelled of leather and finality, but Richard and Sylvia never mentioned it at dinner. When I asked, Sylvia just patted my hand with her ice-cold fingers and said that I should not worry my pretty little head about adult matters. The tension spiked when the letter from the university arrived. I had been accepted into an early entrance pre-college program for mathematics and physics. It was a prestigious opportunity, one that would have required me to leave home early. I should have been thrilled. Instead, I felt a target being painted on my back. Bella was struggling in remedial algebra. Despite 3 private tutors, the idea that the slow sister was intellectually superior to the golden child was a narrative violation that Bella could not tolerate. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. The house was buzzing with preparation for the annual spring gala, an event my father was desperate to host to impress potential investors. Sylvia had bought Bella a vintage silk gown, a delicate thing of pale blue that cost more than $4,000. It was hanging in Bella's room, steaming. I was in my room, reading a textbook on forensic accounting, a subject I found soothingly logical. When a scream shattered the afternoon quiet, it was a high, piercing shriek that cut through my headphones. I ran into the hallway. Sylvia was already rushing out of the master bedroom. We converged on Bella's door at the same time. Bella was standing in the center of the room, sobbing. The blue silk dress lay on the floor, shredded. It looked as though a wild animal had clawed through the bodice. In Bella's hand was a pair of fabric scissors. "She did it!" Bella screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me before I had even crossed the threshold. "Lillian did it. I caught her in here. She was saying crazy things. Mom. She said I didn't deserve to be pretty." "I was in my room," I said, my voice sounding flat and robotic even to my own ears. "Check the cameras." Sylvia didn't look at the cameras. She looked at me with a terrifying mixture of triumph and faux horror. She rushed to Bella, embracing her. "Oh, my poor baby. It's okay. We know she can't help it." Sylvia turned to me, her eyes hard as diamonds. "Lillian, go to your room. Richard will hear about this." "I did not touch the dress," I insisted, trying to keep the panic from making my words slur. "The scissors are in her hand. Sylvia." "Do not call me Sylvia," she snapped. "And do not lie to me. You have been erratic all week. It is jealousy. We knew this would happen with the college news." That evening, the gaslighting escalated from domestic theater to medical intervention. Richard came home, listened to Sylvia's hysterics for 10 minutes, and didn't even ask for my side of the story. He simply made a phone call. An hour later, Dr. Vance arrived. He was a friend of the family, a psychiatrist who played golf with my father and drank too much scotch at the country club. He didn't conduct an evaluation. He sat in the living room, listened to Bella's tearful fabrication, and then looked at me as if I were a broken appliance. "She is exhibiting signs of acute manic aggression." "Doctor," Vance told my father, scribbling on a prescription pad. "It is common with her condition. She needs to be stabilized before she hurts someone else." He prescribed a heavy sedative, chlorpromazine. I knew what it was. I had read the physician's desk reference in the library for fun. It was an antipsychotic used for schizophrenia. I did not have schizophrenia. I had a processing delay and a sister who was a sociopath in training. "I am not taking that," I told my father. "It will turn my brain into mush." "You will take it," Richard said, his voice low and trembling with suppressed rage. "Or you will find yourself in a state facility by morning. I am trying to protect you. Lillian." I took the pill bottle. I went to my room. I flushed the first dose down the toilet and hid the pill under my tongue the next night, spitting it out into a tissue later. I had to stay sharp. I knew they were plotting something, and I needed evidence. Evidence came 3 days later, but not the kind I expected. I was passing the kitchen when I saw the mail pile. Sylvia usually intercepted it, but she was out at a spa day. I saw a credit card statement for my father's Platinum business account. My photographic memory scanned the list of transactions. There were charges for online luxury boutiques, a Gucci bag for $2,500, a pair of Louboutin heels for $1,200, a subscription to a premium influencer marketing service. The dates and times corresponded exactly to when Bella was studying in her room. Later that afternoon, I heard shouting from the study. Richard was yelling at our housekeeper, Maria. "Someone is using this card," Richard roared. "These packages are arriving at the house. Did you steal the number? Maria." Maria was weeping, denying it in broken English. Bella was sitting on the sofa, looking at her phone, the very picture of boredom. I walked into the study. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my face was a mask of calm. I had spent 16 years learning to hide my reactions. "It wasn't Maria," I said. Richard spun around. "Lillian, go back to your room. This doesn't concern you." "It does when you are firing an innocent woman," I said. I held up my iPad. I had taken screenshots of Bella's Instagram stories from a private account I made. In the photos, she was wearing the shoes. The bag was in the background of a selfie she posted 20 minutes ago, tagged with #spoiled. "Look at the dates," I said, placing the iPad on his desk next to the statement. Bella bought them. She saved the credit card information on your browser when you let her buy concert tickets last month. Richard looked at the iPad. He looked at the statement. The connection was undeniable. Even a man as willfully blind as my father could not miss it. Bella gasped, dropping her phone. She hacked me, Daddy. She is stalking me. She is obsessed with me. That is why she ruined my dress. I waited for him to yell at her. I waited for the justice that logic dictated. Richard closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. He looked old. He looked tired. But mostly, he looked like a coward. Lillian, he said softly, why do you hate your sister so much? I blinked. The delay in my brain stretched to 5 seconds. What? You are creating these fabrications, he said, pushing the iPad away. You are obsessed with proving her wrong. It is pathological. Bella is a child. She doesn't know how to use my business accounts. The proof is right there, I said, my voice rising. Dad, look at the photos. Stop it. He slammed his hand on the desk. I am sick of this bickering. You are tearing this family apart because you cannot handle that you are not like us. You are projecting your own theft onto her. He did not believe that. I saw it in his eyes. He knew I was right, but admitting I was right meant admitting Bella was a thief and a liar, and that his perfect family was a sham. It was easier to believe the girl with the broken brain was hallucinating than to face the rot in his own bloodline. Get out, he whispered. Take your medication and get out of my sight. I left the study. I didn't cry. Tears were a waste of hydration. I went upstairs, but I didn't go to my room. I stopped at the top of the landing. The acoustics in the house were strange. If you stood in a specific spot near the linen closet, the sound from the master bedroom traveled up the ventilation shaft with crystal clarity. I sat on the floor, pulling my knees to my chest, and listened. She is becoming a liability. Richard. Sylvia's voice drifted up. It was calm, clinical. The investors are coming next week for the final review. If she has another episode like the dress incident, or if she starts babbling about credit cards to your partners, the deal is dead. We need that capital. I know, Richard's voice was heavy with scotch. But she is my daughter. Is she? Sylvia countered. Look at her. She is cold. She is unfeeling. And now she is dangerous. Doctor. Vance agrees. He says she needs a controlled environment. There is that place in Vermont, the Sisters of Mercy. It is a special boarding school, but it is secure. They handle cases like hers. It is an asylum. Sylvia, Richard said. It is a solution, she corrected him. Just until the deal closes. Just until we secure the future. Or do you want to lose the house? Do you want to lose everything because you are too weak to do what is necessary? There was a long silence. I held my breath, counting the heartbeats thumping in my ears. 1, 2, 3. Call them in the morning, Richard said. Make the arrangements, but tell them it is for her own good. Of course, darling, Sylvia purred. It is always for her own good. I sat there in the dark, the cold hardwood floor seeping through my jeans. They were not sending me to school. They were sending me to a place where they could drug me into silence. A place where my photographic memory would fade into a chemical haze. They were going to lock me away so they could play house with the money my grandmother had likely intended for me. I stood up. My hands were not shaking. My mind, usually a chaotic storm of delayed sounds, suddenly became terrifyingly quiet. The static cleared. They thought I was broken. They thought I was slow. They were about to find out that I was the only one in this house who was truly awake, and I would be damned if I let them bury me without a fight. But I knew, with the cold certainty of a mathematician solving for X, that the time for talking was over. The time for survival had begun. The house was vibrating. It was not a metaphor. The actual floorboards of my bedroom were trembling with the bass of a string quartet playing 3 floors down and the collective weight of 200 of Connecticut's wealthiest pharmaceutical investors. It was the night of the Fairbanks Foundation Gala, an event designed to convince the world that my father's company was as robust as his smile. For me, It was a sensory nightmare. Even with my noise-canceling headphones clamped tight over my ears, the low-frequency thrum of the party seeped into my skull, rattling my teeth. I had been confined to my room since 4 in the afternoon. Sylvia had made it explicitly clear that I was not to be seen. My presence, she argued, was a liability, a variable they could not risk. I was the crazy daughter in the attic, the secret they kept locked away while they toasted to health and prosperity downstairs. I had obeyed. I had sat in my window seat, watching the line of limousines snake up the driveway, depositing women in furs and men in tuxedos who looked like sharks in human skin. But by 10 o'clock at night, the thirst was unbearable. The radiator in my room was stuck on high, a punishment I suspected Sylvia had arranged, turning my sanctuary into a dry sauna. I had run out of water hours ago. My throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. I knew the catering staff would be busy in the main ballroom. If I was careful, if I timed it perfectly, I could slip down the back servants' staircase, get a glass of tap water from the scullery, and vanish before anyone noticed the ghost. I took off my headphones. The wall of sound hit me instantly, a cacophony of laughter, clinking glass, and overlapping conversations that my brain struggled to separate. It sounded like a hive of angry bees. I took a breath, centered myself, and opened my door. The hallway was dim. I moved silently, my socks sliding over the polished mahogany. I reached the landing of the second floor, intending to turn left toward the back stairs. Bella was waiting for me. She was leaning against the banister, looking like a porcelain doll in her new replacement dress, a shimmering silver thing that caught the light from the chandelier. She was not supposed to be upstairs. She was supposed to be the belle of the ball downstairs, but there she was, smiling with a malice that did not reach her eyes. "Thirsty," she whispered. I didn't answer. I tried to step around her. My brain was already lagging, trying to filter her voice from the ambient noise rising from the foyer below. "You look like a wraith," she said, stepping into my path. "Mom said you would try to come down. She said you cannot help yourself. You always have to ruin everything." "Move, Bella," I said. My voice was raspy. "Make me," she challenged. I stepped to the right. She mirrored me. I stepped to the left. She blocked me again. It was a game, a childish game played on the precipice of a disaster. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the boredom in her eyes. She was not doing this because she hated me. She was doing this because she was tired of the adults and wanted entertainment. I was her entertainment. "I just want water," I said, my patience fracturing. I pushed past her. It was not a shove. It was a brush of shoulders, a minimal contact required to navigate the space she was hogging. That was all she needed. Bella threw herself backward. It was a stunt worthy of a professional acrobat. She flailed her arms, let out a piercing scream that cut through the drone of the party like a siren, and collapsed onto the thick Persian runner rug. She did not fall down the stairs. She was too careful for that, but she landed hard enough to make a thud. "Help, Daddy! Help me!" she shrieked, clutching her ankle. The music downstairs stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, sucked dry of air. Then came the rush of footsteps. I stood there, frozen. My hand was still extended slightly from where I had tried to pass her, to the crowd of people now surging up the grand staircase. It looked exactly like the follow-through of a violent push. Sylvia was the first to reach the landing. She looked at Bella wailing on the floor, then at me. Her face contorted into a mask of horrified maternal instinct that was so perfect it had to be rehearsed. "Oh my God!" Sylvia screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "She did it again. She lost control. She wants to kill her sister." The guests were gathering at the bottom of the stairs, faces upturned, eyes wide with scandalous delight. I saw business partners, local politicians, and neighbors. They were staring at me as if I were a rabid animal that had escaped its cage. I stammered, but the words were too slow. She fell." Richard pushed through the crowd. He took the stairs 2 at a time. His face was flushed, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at Bella, who was squeezing out tears. And then he looked at me. In his eyes, I saw the calculation. He could not be the father of a lying, manipulative younger daughter. That would reflect poorly on his parenting. But being the father of a tragic, mentally ill older daughter that garnered sympathy, that made him a martyr. He reached the landing. He did not ask what happened. He did not look for bruises. He raised his hand and struck me across the face. The slap was a thunderclap. It happened in front of everyone. My head snapped to the side. The force of it knocked my equilibrium off, and I stumbled against the wall. A high-pitched ringing started in my left ear, drowning out the gasps from the audience below. My cheek burned, but the cold shock in my chest was colder than any winter wind. "Get in the study," Richard snarled, grabbing my arm. His fingers dug into my bicep, bruising the skin. "Now." He dragged me down the hall, away from the prying eyes. But the damage was done. The narrative was set. He threw me into his private study and slammed the heavy oak door. Locking it, the silence in the room was sudden and violent. Sylvia followed a moment later, slipping inside and leaning against the door, her chest heaving. She wasn't out of breath. She was exhilarating in the adrenaline of the kill. "Richard, the guests," she hissed. "They saw everything." "I know what they saw," Richard shouted, pacing the room. He turned to me. I was standing by the bookshelf, clutching my stinging cheek. "You have ruined me. Do you understand? You have humiliated this family for the last time." "I didn't push her," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking of my hands. "She staged it. Check the angle. She fell backward onto the rug. If I had pushed her from where I stood, she would have gone forward." "Stop it," Richard roared. "Stop with your physics. Stop with your logic. You are sick, Lillian. You are a danger to this family and to yourself." He marched over to his desk and ripped open a drawer. He pulled out a document. I recognized the letterhead. It was the admission paperwork for the facility in Vermont. "Sign it," he demanded, slamming the paper onto the desk. "Voluntary commitment. Sign it, and we can salvage this. We tell them you had a breakdown and you agreed to get help." I looked at the paper. Lillian Fairbanks, being of sound mind, do hereby request admission. "No," I said. Richard blinked. "What did you say?" "No," I repeated. "I am not sick. I have a processing disorder. Bella is the one who needs help. I will not sign away my freedom to cover up your lies." Sylvia stepped forward. "She is delusional. Richard, look at her. She actually believes she is the victim." She walked over to me, her perfume overpowering in the enclosed space. "Give me your phone, Lillian." "Why?" "Because you lose privileges when you assault people," she said. Reaching into my pocket, I tried to pull away, but Richard grabbed my other arm. They wrestled the phone from my grip. Then, for good measure, Richard went to the corner where I had left my laptop earlier that day to work on a school project. He grabbed it. "You are cut off," Richard said, locking the devices in his safe. "No internet, no calls, no spreading your poison to the outside world." "You cannot do this," I said. "I am 16. I have rights." "You have nothing," Richard spat. "You have the roof over your head because I pay for it. You have the clothes on your back because I bought them. And clearly that was a mistake. I cannot have you here. Lillian, I cannot live in fear of what you will do next." He looked at the clock. It was nearly midnight. "Get your bag," he said. His voice dropped to a terrifying calm. "Pack the essentials. We are leaving." "The facility?" I asked, a lump forming in my throat. "Just get your bag," he said. I went to my room. I moved like a robot. I packed a small duffel bag, a change of clothes, my toothbrush, a notebook. I reached for my heavy winter coat, the wool one that could withstand the Connecticut freeze, but it was at the dry cleaners. I only had a thin denim jacket in the closet. I put it on. It offered no warmth. When I came back down, the house was quiet. The party was over. The guests had been ushered out with apologies and vague explanations about a family emergency. Richard was waiting by the back door. Sylvia was not there. She didn't even come to say goodbye. We got into the black Mercedes. I sat in the passenger seat. Richard drove. He did not turn on the radio. He did not look at me. The silence stretched for miles, a physical weight pressing against the windows. I watched the familiar streets of our neighborhood fade into the highway. I waited for the turn north, toward Vermont. But we didn't go north. We went south, toward the city limits, toward the industrial district where the streetlights flickered and the snow turned to gray slush. "Where are we going?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the luxury leather interior. Richard didn't answer. He kept driving until we reached the gritty edge of town, an area I had only seen in passing. He pulled into the cracked parking lot of a 24-hour Greyhound bus station. It was a desolate place, smelling of diesel fumes and stale urine. A few huddled figures sat on the benches outside, wrapped in blankets. Richard put the car in park. He kept the engine running. "Get out," he said. I stared at him. "What?" "Get out, Lillian," he said, staring straight ahead at the brick wall of the station. "I am done. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot look at you and see this failure." "You are leaving me here?" I asked. "It is 2 a.m. It is freezing." "You are smart," he said, his voice void of emotion. "You are always telling me how smart you are. Figure it out." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a money clip. He peeled off a few bills and shoved them into my hand. I looked down. $50, 2 20s and 10. "That should get you a ticket somewhere," he said. "Or a room for the night. I don't care." "Dad," I whispered. It was the last time I would ever use that word. "Please." He finally turned to look at me. His eyes were not angry anymore. They were empty. It was the look one gives to a piece of furniture that no longer fits the decor. "Go," he said. "Don't come back until you cure that sick head of yours. I don't want to see you until you can act like a normal human being. Don't call, don't write, just go." I opened the door. The cold air hit me like a physical blow, biting through the denim jacket instantly. I stepped onto the pavement. My canvas sneakers soaked up the slush. I clutched my duffel bag against my chest. I slammed the door. I didn't wait for him to drive away. I walked toward the station entrance, my spine stiff, but I heard the engine rev. I heard the tires crunch on the gravel. I turned, just for a second, to watch the red taillights of the Mercedes recede into the darkness. He didn't brake. He didn't hesitate. He accelerated, eager to put distance between his perfect life and the refuse he had just discarded. I stood there, shivering uncontrollably, holding $50 in a hand that was already going numb. I looked at the reflection of myself in the dirty glass of the bus station door. I saw a girl with messy hair, a red mark on her cheek, and terror in her eyes. But as the taillights vanished completely, something inside me snapped. It was the final severance of the cord, the hope that he would love me, the hope that they would accept me. It died right there on that frozen pavement. He was right about one thing. I was not his daughter anymore. Daughters are cherished. Daughters are protected. I was trash. But as I pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the fluorescent purgatory of the station, I realized something else. Trash has nothing to lose, and that makes it dangerous. I squeezed the $50 in my fist until my knuckles turned white. I will survive tonight, and one day, I would make sure that this $50 was the most expensive investment Richard Fairbanks ever made. The first 48 hours were a blur of gray concrete and burning fever. I did not just lose my home. I lost the artificial chemical balance my stepmother had forced upon me. The sudden cessation of the heavy sedatives Richard had made me take created a violent storm inside my nervous system. My hands shook so badly I could barely unzip the cheap duffel bag. My skin felt like it was being pricked by 1,000 invisible needles. And the sounds of the city, the screech of subway brakes, the shouting of vendors, the wail of sirens were not just noise, they were physical blows. I spent the nights in the public library, hiding in the stacks behind the reference section until closing time, then finding a corner in a 24-hour laundromat where the attendant was too tired to care about a teenager curling up near the dryers. During the day, I walked. I had to keep moving. The cold in Connecticut is a living thing in January. It seeks out the gaps in your clothes. My denim jacket was a joke against the wind. I washed my face in the restroom of a gas station, staring at a reflection that looked increasingly like a stranger. My eyes were hollow, rimmed with red. My skin was pale and clammy. I was burning up. I was rationing the $50, a bagel, a bottle of water, a cheap packet of aspirin that did nothing for the withdrawal tremors. I knew I needed help, but I also knew that help meant the system. The system meant a phone call to Richard, and a phone call to Richard meant the institution in Vermont. I would rather die on the pavement than let them lock me away. On the afternoon of the third day, the sky turned the color of a bruised plum, threatening snow. I was walking through the older district of the city, a place of brick facades and brass nameplates. My vision was tunneling. The buildings seemed to be leaning over me, judging me. I needed water. My tongue felt swollen in my mouth. I saw a heavy oak door with a brass handle. It looked solid. It looked like safety. I pushed it open and stumbled into a lobby that smelled of lemon polish and old paper. The silence was immediate and blissful. My noise-canceling headphones were around my neck, useless without a charge, but this room was naturally quiet. There was a security desk, empty, and beyond it, a directory, Thorne, Miller and Associates. Most of the names were crossed out or faded. I took 3 steps toward a water cooler in the corner. That was my goal. The water cooler was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I reached for a paper cup, but my hand would not obey my brain. The cup slipped. My knees buckled. I didn't feel the impact when I hit the marble floor. I only felt the notebook sliding out of my bag, my sanctuary, filled with proofs, fractals, and the chaotic comfort of numbers spilling open next to my head. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was a pair of polished black Oxfords stopping inches from my nose. When I opened my eyes, I was not in a hospital. The light was soft, amber-colored, coming from a Tiffany lamp on a desk that looked like it cost more than my father's car. I was lying on a leather Chesterfield sofa, covered by a wool blanket that smelled of cedar and pipe tobacco. I sat up too fast. The room spun. "Careful," a voice said. "Your blood pressure is still stabilizing." I looked toward the window. A man was standing there, looking out at the city skyline. He turned. He was tall, thin, with posture so erect it looked painful. He had a shock of white hair and a face carved from granite. He wore a 3-piece suit, immaculate. Despite being in his own home, this was Elias Thorne. I recognized him not from a person, but from the legal textbooks I had devoured in the library. Judge Elias Thorne, the Iron Hand, the federal judge who had dismantled organized crime syndicates in the 90s before vanishing into retirement. "Where am I?" I croaked. My throat was raw. "You are in my residence," Elias said. He walked over to a small table and poured a cup of tea. He did not offer it to me immediately. He held it, testing the temperature. "And before you ask, no, I did not call the police, and no, I did not call child services." "Why?" I asked, eyeing the door. "Because the police are blunt instruments," he said, handing me the tea. "And you, my dear, are a delicate equation." He walked back to his desk and picked up my notebook. My heart hammered against my ribs. That notebook was private. It was where I mapped out the world to make it make sense. "I took the liberty of looking through this," Elias said, tapping the cover. "Most teenage runaways carry diaries filled with angst and poetry. You carry advanced forensic calculus and game theory models. Page 42. The breakdown of probability regarding the distribution of assets in a blind trust. That is not homework, is it?" I held the warm cup with both hands to stop the shaking. "No. I had Dr. Aris come by while you were unconscious," Elias continued, sitting in his leather chair. "He administered an IV for the dehydration and a non-narcotic protocol to manage the withdrawal from the chlorpromazine. He was quite angry that someone had prescribed such a heavy antipsychotic to a 16-year-old with no history of psychosis. He left the file on the table. I looked at the manila folder. He knew. He knew about the drugs. "I am not crazy," I said. The defense automatic. "I know you are not," Elias said. His voice was dry, devoid of warmth, but also devoid of judgment. It was the voice of a man who dealt only in facts. Crazy people do not derive Euler's identity in the margins of a doodle. You have a processing disorder, likely auditory from the way you watched my lips when I spoke, and you have a mind that frightens people who are less intelligent than you. He picked up a thick book from his desk and slid it across the mahogany surface toward me. It was a copy of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. You have the logic of a chess player. Lillian, he said, using my name for the first time. But you are currently living the circumstances of a pawn. You have a choice to make. What choice? You can walk out that door, Elias said. I will give you $500 and a coat. You will survive for a month, maybe 2. Then the system will catch you, or the streets will break you, or... He paused, his steel gray eyes locking onto mine. You can tell me exactly why a girl with a genius-level IQ was drugged by her own father and left to freeze in my lobby. I looked at the book. Then I looked at him. I took a sip of the tea. It was Earl Grey, strong and hot. I told him everything. I spoke for an hour. I told him about the APD, the noise-canceling headphones, the accidents Bella staged. I told him about the credit cards, the dress, the gala. I told him about the look on Richard's face when he left me at the bus station. I did not cry. I laid the facts out like evidence on a table. When I finished, the room was silent. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. Elias did not offer me a tissue. He did not say a poor thing. He steepled his fingers and stared at the ceiling. It is sloppy, he said finally. What? Their strategy, he said. It is emotional, impulsive. Your father is reacting to shame. Your stepmother is reacting to greed. But the timeline interests me. My grandmother died. The trust is mentioned but suppressed. You are accepted into a program that would grant you independence. Suddenly, you are framed as incompetent and dangerous. He stood up and walked to the window again. They did not just abandon you, Lillian. They are clearing the board. They are establishing a paper trail of mental instability, so that when the trust matures, and I suspect it matures when you turn 18 or 21, they can petition the court for conservatorship. They want to control the money, and to do that, they need to control you, or eliminate you. A chill that had nothing to do with the fever went down my spine. They think I am trash, I whispered. They just wanted me gone. No, Elias corrected. People throw away trash. They lock away assets, by institutionalizing you, or by driving you to disappear. They win by default. If you are missing or declared mentally incompetent, the trustee powers often revert to the next of kin. He turned back to me. The shadows of the room made him look like a hawk perched on a ledge. I am a retired man. Lillian. My wife passed away 5 years ago. My children are grown and disappointed that I spent more time with the law than with them. I am writing a book on the evolution of corporate fraud, and quite frankly, I am bored. I need an assistant who can see patterns others miss. And you need a sanctuary. You want me to work for you? I want to make a deal, Elias said. I still have friends in the family court system, judges who owe me favors, clerks who know how to misplace a file or expedite a sealed order. I can arrange for a quiet guardianship transfer. I can become your legal guardian without your father ever knowing you are not freezing in a ditch. It will require some creative maneuvering, but I enjoy the challenge. He walked over and placed a hand on the back of the sofa. I will teach you. I will teach you the law, not as it is written in books, but as it is played in the courtroom. I will teach you forensic accounting. I will teach you how to weaponize that memory of yours. In exchange, you give me your mind. You work on my cases. You help me with my book. You become my eyes and ears in places I am too old to go. Why, I asked, why would you do this for a stranger? Elias smiled then. It was a small, sharp thing. Because I hate bullies, Lillian, and I hate wasted potential. Your father is a man who breaks things he does not understand. I am a man who fixes them. He held out his hand. It was weathered, covered in age spots, but steady as a rock. "The world thinks Lillian Fairbanks is a broken girl," he said. "Let her be broken. Let her disappear. If you take this hand, you are not that girl anymore. You are my student. You are my protégé. And one day, you will be their nightmare." I looked at his hand. I thought about the $50 in my pocket. I thought about Richard's Mercedes driving away. I thought about Bella's smirk. I reached out and took his hand. His grip was iron. "Good," Elias said. "First order of business. You need a bath, and you need to change. The guest room is down the hall. There are clothes there that belong to my granddaughter. They should fit." I stood up. I felt weak, but the dizziness was gone. I walked to the bathroom he pointed to. It was a palace of marble and gold fixtures. I turned on the shower, letting the steam fill the room. I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was long, tangled, matted from days of sleeping on floors. It was the hair of the girl Bella had tormented. It was the hair of the girl Richard had slapped. I opened the medicine cabinet. I found a pair of grooming scissors. They were sharp, precise. I did not hesitate. I grabbed a handful of hair and sheared it off. The locks fell into the sink, dark snakes against the white porcelain. I cut and cut until the weight was gone. I trimmed it close to my scalp, a jagged, fierce pixie cut that exposed the sharp angles of my face. I looked older. I looked harder. The girl who cried because her sister ruined a dress was gone. The girl who begged her father not to leave her was gone. I stared into my own eyes in the mirror. They were dry. They were cold. They were ready. I washed the face of Lillian Fairbanks, the victim. When I walked out of that bathroom, I would still be Lillian, but I would be something else entirely. I would be the variable they forgot to account for. I would be the storm that was coming for them, moving silently, gathering strength in the dark until it was too late to board up the windows. I turned on the water to rinse the hair down the drain. I watched it swirl away, disappearing into the dark pipes. "Goodbye," I whispered. I turned off the light and stepped out into my new life. 12 years is a long time for a human, but for a blade, it is merely the duration of the forging process. If you looked for Lillian Fairbanks in the public records during that decade, you would find a ghost. I did not exist. The girl who shivered at the bus station had evaporated into the gray fog of the city, replaced by a phantom entity constructed by Elias Thorne. He called it protective obscurity. I called it boot camp. My education was twofold. During the day, under a redacted identity secured through Elias's deep connections with the university board, I attended Harvard Law. I was the student who sat in the back row, wearing oversized hoodies and noise-canceling headphones, speaking only when called upon and delivering answers so precise they discouraged follow-up questions. I did not go to parties. I did not join study groups. I treated the law not as a philosophy, but as a complex operating system code that could be hacked, rewritten, and executed. I graduated top of my class, summa cum laude. But my name did not appear in the commencement program. My diploma hangs in a vault, not on a wall. At night, the real education began. Elias taught me the dark arts of forensic accounting. He showed me that money, like water, always leaves a trace. No matter how deep you bury the pipes, I learned to read a ledger like a symphony conductor reads a score. I could spot a dissonance in a tax return from a mile away, a shell company in the Caymans, a bloated consulting fee in Zurich, a charitable donation that circled back to the donor's pocket. My auditory processing disorder, once my greatest weakness, became my greatest tactical asset, because I could not rely on the immediate noise of the world. I learned to rely on the static data. People lie. Their tone fluctuates. Their words deceive. But numbers are the only honest things on this planet. A bank transfer time-stamped at 3 a.m. tells a story that no amount of smooth talking can cover up. We did not join a white shoe law firm. We built our own fortress. We founded Aegis Consulting. It was a ghost firm. We had no website, no signage, and our office was an unmarked floor in a high-security building in Midtown. We were the fixers for the fixers. When a Fortune 500 company found an embezzlement scheme that would tank their stock if made public, They called us. When a tech mogul needed to find out who was leaking trade secrets without alerting the board, they called us. We did the dirty work in the dark, drafting the strategies that expensive lawyers would later take credit for in the light. And while I built an empire in the shadows, I watched my family rot in the spotlight. I had a dedicated server in my office solely for monitoring the Fairbanks estate. It was my morning ritual. Coffee, black, market trends, the Fairbanks report. Richard had expanded his pharmaceutical company, Fairbanks Pharma, into a mid-level giant, on paper. He was a success story. In reality, he was a man running on fumes and fraud. My analysis of his quarterly reports showed cracks in the foundation as early as 5 years ago. He was cutting corners on quality control to maximize yield. There were quiet settlements with patients who had suffered adverse reactions, settlements buried under non-disclosure agreements that I had hacked into and read. He was one FDA inspection away from a prison sentence, and he was borrowing heavily to keep the stock price inflated. Sylvia had become a caricature of the socialite she desperately wanted to be. The surveillance photos from charity galas showed a woman at war with gravity. Her face was pulled so tight by successive facelifts that she looked permanently surprised. She was hemorrhaging money on jewelry, spiritual retreats in Bali, and a collection of ugly modern art she pretended to understand. And then there was Bella. My little sister had evolved from a lying child into a digital parasite. She was 26 now, a self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer with 2 million followers who hung on her every filtered word. Her handle was Bella Vita. Her feed was a curated hallucination of private jets rented on the ground for photos, champagne towers, and motivational quotes about hustle culture, written by a girl who had never worked a day in her life. She was the epitome of the hollow generation, shiny on the outside, empty on the inside, and funded entirely by a credit line that was nearing its limit. The crash was inevitable. I just needed to know when to push the debris. The catalyst arrived on my 28th birthday. It was not a card or a cake. It was a notification from the probate court archives. My grandmother's will. The suppression order on the trust details had expired. The document, which Richard and Sylvia had tried so hard to bury, was now accessible to anyone who knew where to look. And I knew exactly where to look. My grandmother had left me $3,600,000. The terms were specific: the principal, plus the compounded interest over 12 years, which brought the total closer to $5 million, was to be released to Lillian Fairbanks upon her 28th birthday. Provided she was of sound mind and not under any legal guardianship. It was a fortune to most, but to Richard Fairbanks, right now, it was oxygen. My forensic deep dive into his current liquidity revealed that Fairbanks Pharma was underwater. A major loan was coming due in 3 months. He needed $4 million to avoid a default that would trigger a hostile takeover. He didn't have it. He had leveraged the house, the cars, even his life insurance. They needed a miracle. And suddenly, they remembered the daughter they threw away. I watched the panic unfold in real time through the intercepted emails between Richard and his personal attorney. Subject: the trust fund. From Richard Fairbanks to Marcus Sterling. Esquire. She turns 28 next week. The bank says the funds are sitting in escrow. If she claims them, we are finished. If she is dead or incapacitated, who is the beneficiary? From Marcus Sterling, Esquire, to Richard Fairbanks. If she is dead, it goes to the next of kin. If she is incapacitated, you can petition for conservatorship. You become the trustee. You control the assets. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, watching the words glow on my screen. They didn't want to find me to apologize. They wanted to find me to consume me. They hired a private investigator, a cheap one. I knew because I traced the payment. They are coming, I told Elias that evening. We were standing on the balcony of the Aegis office, overlooking the grid of Manhattan. Are the preparations in place? Elias asked, sipping his scotch. The decoy is active, I said. We had anticipated this moment for a decade. I had maintained a fake paper trail that led to a run-down apartment complex in the Bronx. We had planted just enough digital breadcrumbs to make it look convincing a fake job at a diner, a few unpaid utility bills, a credit score that hovered in the low 500s. We created a version of Lillian Fairbanks that matched their expectations: broken, poor, and struggling. 2 weeks later, the investigator found the apartment. He didn't find me. Of course, he found a neighbor I had paid to say that Lillian lived there but was currently away at a facility or wandering the streets. The neighbor described a woman who talked to herself, who was paranoid, who couldn't hold down a job. It was the confirmation bias they craved. The legal machinery started to turn. Sylvia and Richard didn't reach out to me. They didn't try to call. They went straight for the throat. They filed an emergency petition with the family court in Connecticut. The motion was for an involuntary conservatorship. The narrative they spun in the filing was a masterpiece of fiction. They claimed they had been searching for me for years. They claimed I was mentally unstable, suffering from severe schizophrenia. A diagnosis Dr. Vance had conveniently falsified years ago, and that I was a danger to myself. They argued that allowing me access to $3.6 million would be a death sentence, that I would overdose or be exploited by criminals. Therefore, for my own protection, my father should be granted total control over my finances and my person. The summons arrived at the decoy address. My paid contact forwarded it to my secure box immediately. I held the thick envelope in my hands. The paper felt heavy, expensive. State of Connecticut versus Lillian Fairbanks. I walked into Elias's office. He was reading the first edition of The Count of Monte Cristo. He lowered the book and looked at the envelope in my hand. "Is that it?" he asked. "The hearing is set for next Tuesday," I said. "They are asking for immediate temporary guardianship, pending a full psychiatric evaluation by their chosen doctors." "Who is the judge?" Elias asked. "Judge Frederick Halloway," I replied. Elias chuckled, a dry rasping sound. "Freddie, I failed him in torts back in 1982. He is a stickler for procedure but terrified of bad press. He will want this over quickly." "They think I am going to walk into that courtroom in rags," I said, running my thumb over the raised seal of the court. "They think I am going to be the stuttering, scared girl who can't process their rapid-fire accusations. They think I will have a public defender who hasn't even read the file." "And what will they find instead?" Elias asked, his eyes twinkling with a dangerous light. I walked over to the shredder in the corner of the room. I didn't shred the summons. I placed it carefully in my leather briefcase, right next to the hard drive containing 12 years of dirt on Fairbanks Pharma. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that had just realized the shepherd left the gate open. "They are going to find that the girl they threw away didn't die," I said softly. "She just underwent a corporate restructuring." I looked at Elias. "The fish has been bitten. Elias, reel them in." "Do you want me to arrange counsel?" he asked, playing his part in our ritual. "No," I said, turning to look at the city one last time before the war began. "I don't need a lawyer. I need an audience." I was ready. The blade was sharp. The trap was set. And for the first time in 12 years, I was going home, not to visit, but to foreclose. The conference room at Sterling, Holt and Associates, was designed to intimidate. It was a glass cage suspended 40 floors above the city, filled with furniture that cost more than most people earned in a decade. The table was a slab of black marble, cold and unforgiving. This was the arena they had chosen for my slaughter. I arrived 15 minutes early. Punctuality is the courtesy of kings, but anxiety is the trademark of the victim. I needed to look like the latter. I had spent 2 hours that morning constructing the persona of the broken Lillian Fairbanks. I washed my hair with cheap bar soap so it looked dull and frizzy. I wore no makeup, letting the natural pallor of my skin and the dark circles under my eyes, courtesy of a sleepless night reviewing tax codes, stand out. I chose a shapeless gray cardigan that was 2 sizes too big and a pair of trousers that had seen better days. But the pièce de résistance was the glasses. They were thick, wire-rimmed frames with non-prescription lenses that magnified my eyes slightly, giving me the look of a startled owl. I sat in the corner of the room, clutching a worn canvas tote bag to my chest, as if it contained my last earthly possessions. Inside, it actually contained a high-fidelity recording device sewn into the lining. But to the naked eye, it was just a bag of junk. When the door opened, the air in the room changed. It became heavy, perfumed, and toxic. Marcus Sterling walked in first. He was a man who clearly practiced his smile in the mirror every morning to ensure it conveyed zero warmth. He was wearing a navy pinstripe suit that screamed billable hours. He didn't look at me. He looked at his watch, then at the paralegal trailing behind him. Then came my family. Sylvia entered with the gravity of a widow at a funeral. Though nobody had died, she was wearing black, of course, a tasteful, expensive black sheath dress that highlighted her figure while pretending to be modest. She saw me and immediately brought a manicured hand to her mouth, letting out a gasp that was theatrical enough for Broadway. "Oh, Richard," she whispered, loud enough for the microphone in the ceiling to pick up. "Look at her, the poor thing." Richard followed. He looked older than I remembered. The stress of his failing business was etched into the lines around his mouth, but his arrogance was still intact. He looked at me with a mixture of revulsion and relief. Revulsion because I looked like a homeless person. Relief because I looked like a homeless person. Bella brought up the rear. She was scrolling on her phone, barely glancing up. She wore oversized sunglasses indoors, likely to hide a hangover or to look famous. She didn't acknowledge me. To her, I was an NPC, a non-playable character in the video game of her life. "Please, take a seat," Marcus Sterling said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. He didn't introduce himself. He assumed his presence was enough. I sat down. I let my shoulders hunch forward. I kept my eyes on the marble table. "We are here for the deposition of Ms. Lillian Fairbanks regarding the petition for emergency conservatorship filed by Richard Fairbanks," Sterling announced for the record. The court reporter, a tired-looking woman in the corner, began typing. Sterling leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Ms. Fairbanks, do you understand why you are here today?" I blinked rapidly. I waited 5 seconds, a deliberate delay to simulate my auditory processing lag. I think so," I stammered. My voice was small, scratchy. "It is about the money. The money Grandma left." Sterling smiled. It was a shark sensing blood. "It is about your safety. Lillian, your father is very concerned about your ability to manage your own affairs. We have reports that you have been living in less than ideal conditions." He slid a photo across the table. It was a picture of the decoy apartment building in the Bronx, a grainy shot of me, or rather, a body double I had hired digging through a dumpster. "Is this you?" Sterling asked. I looked at the photo. I touched it with a trembling finger. "I was looking for boxes. To move. To move where?" Sterling pressed. "You have been evicted 3 times in the last 2 years, haven't you?" I hadn't. Those eviction notices were forged documents I had planted in the public record myself. But I nodded. I have trouble with the rent. The numbers get mixed up in my head." Sylvia let out a soft sob. "She was always like this. She cannot handle numbers. It creates too much noise for her." I swallowed the urge to laugh. I could calculate the compound interest on Sterling's student loans in my head right now, but I kept my face blank. "Ms. Fairbanks," Sterling continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "are you currently under the care of a physician?" "No," I whispered. "Doctors. They give me pills. The pills make the world go gray. I don't like the gray." Richard spoke up then. His voice was smooth, the voice of a CEO closing a deal. "Lillian, honey, we just want to help you. You look sick. You look malnourished. We have a place for you. A nice place where people can take care of you. You won't have to worry about rent or food ever again." "And the money?" I asked, looking up at him. $3 million. Richard sighed, as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "That money is a burden, Lillian. It makes you a target. Bad people will try to take it from you. I will manage it. I will keep it safe for you. Like you kept the company safe." I wanted to ask, But I didn't. Instead, I said, "I don't want to go to the hospital. Please don't make me go." "It is not a hospital," Sylvia said soothingly. "It is a sanctuary." Sterling cleared his throat. He was getting bored. He wanted to wrap this up so he could make his tea time. "Ms. Fairbanks, do you have legal representation present today?" This was the pivot point, the moment the trap snapped shut. I looked around the room, wide-eyed. I called a few numbers from the phone book, but they said they cost money. I don't have enough. "So you are unrepresented?" Sterling asked, checking a box on his legal pad with a flourish. "The court said, they said I could have a public lawyer," I asked, making my voice tremble. "You have the right to court-appointed counsel." "Yes," Sterling said, barely hiding his smirk. "But typically, in civil matters like this, if you haven't secured one by now," he trailed off, implying a hopelessness that wasn't legally accurate. "I don't want a stranger," I said, hugging my bag tighter. I will just talk. I can talk for myself. Is that allowed?" Sterling looked at Richard. They exchanged a glance that was pure triumph. A mentally unstable girl representing herself against a top-tier firm. It was a massacre waiting to happen. "You have the right to represent yourself, Ms. Fairbanks," Sterling said, "although I would strongly advise against it given the complexity of the assets involved." "I will do it," I said. "I don't trust lawyers." "Very well," Sterling said. He didn't even try to hide his amusement. "Let the record show that the respondent has waived her right to counsel and has elected to proceed pro se." The rest of the deposition was a humiliation conga line. Sterling asked me basic questions about finance. What is an ETF? What is a fiduciary duty? And I deliberately gave wrong or nonsensical answers. "An ETF," I frowned. Is that like a bank account?" Bella actually snorted. She didn't even look up from her phone. "No further questions," Sterling said after an hour. He closed his folder. "I think we have established a clear pattern of incapacity." Richard stood up. He walked over to me. He didn't hug me. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that looked paternal, but felt like a branding iron. "We will see you in court on Tuesday. Lillian," he said. "It will be over soon. Then you can come home." "Home," I echoed, staring at his expensive cufflinks. "Okay." They left the room first. I stayed behind, pretending to struggle with the zipper of my bag. As they walked down the hallway, the heavy glass door didn't close all the way. The acoustic dampening in the hallway was excellent, but my hearing my curse and my gift was better, and I had the recording device running. "That was pathetic," Bella's voice carried clearly. "She smells like old soup. Did you see her shoes?" "Focus, Bella," Richard snapped. "Did you call the broker?" "Yes," Bella replied. "He said if we put the deposit down by Friday, the yacht is ours, the Sea Witch. It is perfect for the summer content schedule. We cannot touch the trust money until the judge signs the order," Marcus Sterling warned. "Tuesday afternoon, once the gavel drops. You are the trustee, Richard. Then you can reimburse yourself for care expenses. But until then, do not spend a dime you don't have." "I have the bridge loan covering the deposit," Richard said. "I will pay it back the second her funds clear. It is $3.6 million. Marcus, plus interest, it is nearly $5 million. That covers the debt and the boat." She didn't even know what an ETF was. Sylvia laughed. It was a cruel, jagged sound. God, I was worried for a second she might have actually learned something in 12 years. But she is just empty. "She is a vegetable," Sterling agreed. "This is going to be the easiest fee I have earned all year. I almost feel bad taking your money. Richard, almost." Their laughter faded as they reached the elevator bank. I sat alone in the conference room. The silence rushed back in. But this time, it wasn't oppressive. It was clarifying. I stopped hunching. I straightened my spine. I took off the thick glasses and placed them on the black marble table. I pulled a sanitizing wipe from my bag and cleaned my hands, scrubbing away the feeling of Richard's touch. They were buying a yacht. They were so confident in my destruction that they were already spending the salvage money. I reached into my bag and pulled out my encrypted phone. I typed a message to Elias. The performance is complete. They have swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. They believe I am incompetent and unrepresented. Sterling is already counting his fees. A moment later, Elias replied, "Excellent. The court docket is updated. Judge Holloway is presiding. I trust you enjoyed playing the fool." I looked at the empty chair where Marcus Sterling had sat. So smug, so assured of his intellectual superiority. It was educational. I typed back, "They think they are hunting a wounded rabbit. They have no idea they just walked into a bear trap." I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. I looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Richard was signing a loan agreement he couldn't afford, using money he didn't own, to buy a boat he would never sail. The greed was not just a flaw, it was a mechanism, and like any mechanism, it could be leveraged. They had underestimated me because they judged me by their own standard surface. Noise, appearance. They didn't understand that the most dangerous things in the world are often the quietest. I picked up my bag. I didn't look like a victim anymore. I walked out of the office of Sterling. Holt and Associates, not with the shuffle of the defeated, but with the stride of an executioner. Tuesday was coming, and I was going to bring the thunder. The 72 hours leading up to the hearing were not spent in prayer or panic. They were spent in the digital trenches. While Richard and Sylvia were likely picking out the upholstery for their phantom yacht, I was systematically dismantling the structural integrity of their lives. I started with the money. Richard believed his company, Fairbanks Pharma, was a fortress. In reality, it was a sieve. I sat in my true office at Aegis Consulting, 3 monitors glowing with lines of code that cascaded like green rain. I did not need to break a window to get into his system. I just needed to walk through the back door he had left open. Richard had always been cheap with cybersecurity, outsourcing IT to a budget firm in Eastern Europe that had not updated their firewall protocols in 18 months. It took me less than 40 minutes to gain administrative access to the internal ledger. What I found was not just mismanagement, it was a felony. Richard was not just losing money, he was stealing it. I traced a series of wire transfers starting 3 years ago. $200,000 here, $150,000 there. They were labeled in the books as consulting fees, or R&D procurement, paid to a shell company called Orion Holdings, registered in the British Virgin Islands. A quick cross-reference of the incorporation documents, which required a separate hack into the registrar's database, revealed the beneficial owner of Orion Holdings. It was not a partner, it was not a vendor, it was Richard Fairbanks. He was siphoning corporate funds money that belonged to shareholders and employee pension plans into a private account to pay for his lifestyle. The mortgage on the Connecticut estate, Sylvia's jewelry, Bella's allowance. It was all being funded by embezzled cash. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul. But Paul was also broke. The Orion account was currently overdrawn. That was why they were so desperate for my grandmother's trust. It was not just about greed anymore. It was about avoiding prison. I printed the transaction logs. I highlighted the dates where he moved money out of the employee 401k match program to cover his country club dues. This was not just evidence for a family court. This was a silver platter for the SEC and the IRS. Next, I turned my attention to Bella. The internet never forgets, but people like Bella believe that hitting delete is a magic eraser. She had scrubbed her social media presence when she started gaining traction as an influencer, removing anything that didn't fit her love and light brand. But I knew where to look. I accessed the cached archives of the servers that hosted the social media platforms she used back in high school. I searched for the date January 12th, 12 years ago, the day after I was abandoned. I found it, a post on a now-defunct microblogging site. Finally got the freak out of the house. No more walking on eggshells. Dad drove the trash to the dump last night. Best birthday present ever. It did not name me explicitly, but the timestamp was damning. It was posted at 8 in the morning, 6 hours after Richard left me at the bus station. It proved premeditation. It proved malice. It proved that my mental breakdown was a celebrated event, not a family tragedy. I took a screenshot. I also recovered a deleted video from a month prior to that, where Bella was laughing with her friends in her bedroom, holding a pair of scissors. "Watch this," she said to the camera. "I am going to make it look like she attacked me. It is going to be Oscar-worthy." The video cut off there. It was the dress incident. She had filmed her rehearsal. I saved the file to a thumb drive, encrypted with military-grade security. The final piece of the puzzle was the medical record. Dr. Vance, the psychiatrist who had prescribed the heavy antipsychotics, had lost his medical license 4 years ago for insurance fraud. He was currently living in a studio apartment in New Jersey, working as a night manager at a pharmacy, which was ironic given his history. I did not go to him myself. I sent an associate from Aegis, a man who looked like a linebacker and spoke very few words. He offered Dr. Vance a simple choice hand over the original, unaltered notes from his sessions with Lillian Fairbanks, or have his current employer informed about the $3,000 he had stolen from the register over the past 6 months. Vance handed over the box within 10 minutes. The files were dusty, but the ink was clear. In his private notes, not the ones he gave Richard, he had written, "Patient exhibits high intelligence, logical consistency, no signs of mania or psychosis, auditory processing disorder evident. Father insists on sedation, prescribing chlorpromazine under duress from father to pacify household tension." He had admitted, in his own handwriting, that he drugged a healthy child because her father paid him to. I placed the file in the growing stack of evidence. The case was building itself. It was logical. It was irrefutable. But I needed one last thing. I needed the emotional dagger. I needed the jury and the judge to hear the hate directly from the source. That opportunity arrived the night before the hearing. I was at the Decoy apartment in the Bronx. It was a staging ground I had curated perfectly. Peeling paint, a mattress on the floor, the smell of damp plaster. I sat on a folding chair, reading a book. When the buzzer rang, I checked the hidden camera feed on my phone. It was Sylvia. She was wearing a trench coat and a headscarf, looking like a spy from a bad movie. She held a basket. I buzzed her in. When she entered the apartment, she wrinkled her nose. She scanned the room, her eyes darting to the corners. I knew what she was looking for. She was checking for witnesses. "Lillian," she cooed, stepping over a pile of dirty laundry I had arranged near the door. "Oh, this place, it is dreadful." "It is all I can afford," I said, keeping my voice low and wavering. "Why are you here?" "Sylvia." "I brought you some food," she said, setting the basket on a wobbly table. "Pound cake, your favorite." I had never liked pound cake. "Thank you," I said. She sat on the edge of the mattress, careful not to let her coat touch the bedding. She reached into her purse and adjusted something. I saw the faint red blink of a recording light through the fabric of her bag. A consumer-grade voice recorder. Amateur hour. "I wanted to talk to you before tomorrow," she said, her voice dropping to a sympathetic register. "About the court. You know we are doing this because we love you. Right? You are not well. Lillian, you haven't been well since you were a teenager." "I remember," I said, staring at the floor. "I remember you told Dad to send me away." "We had to," she said. "You were violent." "I wasn't," I said. Bella cut the dress. "Don't start with that paranoia again," Sylvia sighed, the mask slipping slightly. "This is exactly why you need guardianship. You rewrite history in your head." "I just wanted to stay," I whispered. "I would have been quiet. I would have stayed in my room." "It wasn't about you being quiet," Sylvia snapped. "It was about you being wrong. You made people uncomfortable. Lillian, the way you stared, the way you couldn't answer simple questions. You were an embarrassment." I looked up. "So you threw me away because I embarrassed you." "We did not throw you away," she hissed. "We tried to fix you, but you are unfixable. Look at you. You are 28 years old and you are living in a rat hole. You are useless." "Is that why you want the money?" I asked. "Because I am useless." Sylvia laughed. It was a cold, hard sound. "The money," That money is wasted on you. You would probably burn it or lose it. We are going to put it to good use. We deserve it, after dealing with you. Dealing with me, I pressed. You haven't seen me in 12 years. And those were the best 12 years of my life, she spat out. God, why couldn't you just stay gone? Why did we have to drag you back out of the gutter? I told Richard that night at the bus station that we should have driven you further away, maybe to another state. Then maybe you wouldn't have crawled back. There it was, the confession. You told him to drive further, I asked, ensuring clarity for the microphone hidden in the smoke detector above her head. I told him to leave you where no one would find you. Sylvia stood up, smoothing her coat. But Richard has a soft spot. He gave you money. Didn't he? $50? More than you were worth. She walked to the door. Eat the cake, Lillian, and tomorrow, just nod your head and sign the papers. Don't make this difficult. If you fight us, I promise you, we will put you in a facility so dark you will never see the sun again. She slammed the door. I waited 1 minute, then I stood up. I walked over to the smoke detector and retrieved the SD card. I loaded the audio file onto my laptop. The quality was crystal clear. Every venomous word, every admission of abandonment, every threat. I emailed the file to Elias. Subject: The Final Nail. Attachment: Sylvia _ confession ... W. V. Elias replied instantly. Received. It is brutal. And it is perfect. Get some sleep. Counselor, tomorrow we go to war. I left the decoy apartment for the last time. I took a cab to the Upper East Side, to a building with a doorman who knew my real name. I took the private elevator to the penthouse floor. My home was a sanctuary of glass and steel. Minimalist, quiet, a place where the acoustics were engineered for silence. I poured a glass of water filtered, cold, and stepped out onto the balcony. The city of New York sprawled below me, a grid of electricity and ambition. The wind was cold, biting at my face, reminding me of that night at the bus station, but I was not shivering. I wore a silk robe that cost more than Richard's car payments. I looked down at the streets where I had once wandered as a ghost. For 12 years, I had been afraid, even as I built my career, even as I amassed my own fortune. There was a small, trembling part of me that feared they were right, that I was broken, that I was a defect. But tonight, looking at the evidence I had assembled, the fear evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard certainty. They were the broken ones. Richard, stealing from his own people. Sylvia, driven by a hollow vanity so deep it had consumed her soul. Bella, a construct of lies and filters. They were not giants, they were parasites, and tomorrow I was going to introduce them to the host's immune system. I leaned against the railing, feeling the hum of the city vibrating through the soles of my feet. My brain, usually delaying the sounds of the world, felt perfectly synchronized with the rhythm of the night. You can't live alone, they had said. I smiled at the darkness. Watch me. The courtroom smelled of floor wax, stale coffee, and the specific, cloying scent of desperation disguised as concern. To anyone else, it looked like a standard family court hearing, perhaps a bit more crowded than usual. To me, it was a theater production where the tickets had been sold out for weeks. My father had invited the press. Of course he had. I sat alone at the defendant's table. The wood was cool under my fingertips, the only grounding element in a room that felt like it was spinning. Behind me, the gallery was packed. There were local reporters with notepads, a few cameras from lower-tier cable news networks, and a handful of curiosity seekers who followed high-profile probate cases. Richard had spun the narrative perfectly. This was not a hostile takeover of a woman's life. It was a heartwarming reunification. The headline was already written in their minds. Prominent CEO rescues, troubled daughter from life on the streets. My auditory processing disorder was flaring up under the stress. The murmur of the crowd, the shuffling of papers, the squeak of shoes on tile, it all hit my brain at the same volume. It was a wall of static. I kept my head down, letting my hair now a short, sharp pixie cut. though I wore a hooded sweatshirt to obscure it curtain my face. To the onlookers, I looked terrified. I looked like a feral animal cornered by animal control. I was not terrified. I was counting. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Frederick Halloway entered. He was a man of routine, with a face that looked like it had been eroded by decades of listening to petty grievances. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at the docket. "In the matter of the guardianship of Lillian Fairbanks," he read, his voice bored. "Counsel, please identify yourselves." Marcus Sterling stood up. He buttoned his jacket with a flourish. "Marcus Sterling, representing the petitioners, Richard and Sylvia Fairbanks. We are also joined by Ms. Bella Fairbanks, the respondent's sister." "And for the respondent?" Judge Halloway asked, looking at my empty table. I did not stand up. I did not speak. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, then 10. Sterling sighed, a sound designed to elicit sympathy from the bench. "Your Honor, as we noted in our filing, Ms. Fairbanks is unrepresented. She has difficulty communicating. We believe she does not fully comprehend the nature of these proceedings." The judge looked at me. "Ms. Fairbanks, do you have counsel present?" I kept my eyes on the table. I shook my head slightly, a jerky, nervous motion. "Let the record show the respondent is pro se," the judge said, making a note. "Proceed. Mr. Sterling." Sterling moved to the center of the room. He didn't use a podium. He wanted to own the space. He turned to the gallery first, then to the judge. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice dripping with honeyed gravity, "we are not here today to litigate a crime. We are here to prevent a tragedy. 12 years ago. The Fairbanks family suffered a devastating blow when their eldest daughter, Lillian, succumbed to a severe mental health crisis and ran away from home. For over a decade, my clients have searched tirelessly. They have lost sleep. They have spent a fortune on investigators. They have prayed." I heard a sniffle from the row behind him. "Sylvia. She was performing beautifully." "Last week, they finally found her," Sterling continued, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "But the Lillian they found is not the vibrant young woman she could have been. She was living in squalor in the Bronx. She has no employment. She has no support system. And most concerningly, she has no grip on reality. Now, a trust fund established by her late grandmother is set to mature. $3,600,000. To hand this sum of money to a woman who cannot even maintain a bank account would be negligent. It would be dangerous. We are asking the court to grant Mr. Fairbanks conservatorship, solely to protect his daughter from the wolves who would exploit her." "Call your first witness," the judge said. "We call Mr. Richard Fairbanks." Richard walked to the stand. He looked the part of the weary patriarch. He wore a suit that was expensive but not flashy, a charcoal gray that suggested humility. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The irony almost made me smile, but I kept my face hidden. "Mr. Fairbanks," Sterling asked softly, "tell us about the night Lillian left." Richard took a deep breath. He looked directly at me, his eyes wet. "It was the hardest night of my life. She was having an episode. She was violent. She attacked her sister. We tried to calm her down, but she just snapped. She ran out of the house. I drove after her. I looked for her for hours in the snow, but she was gone." "And how has this affected you?" "I have cried every night for 12 years, Richard said, his voice breaking. "I built a company. I made money. But none of it mattered because my little girl was missing. When we found her last week, God, it broke my heart. She didn't even recognize me. She was talking about conspiracies, about people following her." He wiped a tear. The press scribbled furiously. "I just want to bring her home," Richard whispered. "I don't care about the money. I just want to make sure she's safe. She can't live alone. She forgets to eat. She forgets to bathe. She is a danger to herself." "Thank you, Mr. Fairbanks," Sterling said. I sat perfectly still. My hands were clasped under the table, but not in prayer. I was tapping my thumb against the side of my index finger. keeping time with the rhythm of his lies. Every word he spoke was perjury, and every word was being transcribed by the court reporter. "Next witness," the judge said. "We call Mrs. Sylvia Fairbanks." Sylvia took the stand. She had chosen a modest navy dress and pearls. She looked like a mother, not the wicked stepmother she was. "Mrs. Fairbanks, do you believe Lillian is capable of managing $3.6 million?" Sterling asked. "Absolutely not," Sylvia said firmly. "Your Honor, Lillian has the emotional maturity of a child. She is easily confused. If she gets access to that money, someone will take it from her in a week. Or worse, she will use it to hurt herself. We have medical history." She paused, looking at Sterling. "Yes," Sterling said, picking up a folder. "Your Honor, we would like to submit Exhibit A. These are the psychiatric evaluations from Dr. Vance, dating back to when Lillian was 16. They confirm a diagnosis of schizophrenia and severe paranoia." I saw the judge glance at the papers. He didn't know they were forged. He didn't know Dr. Vance was a disgraced fraud. He just saw an official-looking letterhead. "And," Sylvia added, "we have seen how she lives now. It is heartbreaking." "We call Mr. Jonas Miller," Sterling announced. This was the neighbor, the actor, the man who lived in the apartment next to my decoy unit in the Bronx. He shambled to the stand, wearing a stained flannel shirt. He looked nervous, which played well for them. "Mr. Miller," Sterling said, "you live next door to the respondent." "Yeah," Miller grunted. "For about 6 months." "Describe her behavior." "She is weird," Miller said, glancing at Richard, likely checking for approval. "She screams at the walls. Sometimes she knocks on my door asking for food. She leaves trash in the hallway. She told me once that the CIA was watching her microwave." The courtroom murmured. This was the nail in the coffin. Independent verification of my insanity. "She can't take care of herself," Miller concluded. "No way." Sterling rested his case. He looked triumphant. He walked back to his table and whispered something to Richard. I saw Richard nod. A small, tight movement. They thought it was over. "Ms. Fairbanks," Judge Holloway's voice cut through the static. I lifted my head slightly, just enough to see him over the rim of the table. "You have heard the testimony," the judge said, his tone softening with pity. "The petitioners have presented a compelling case that you require assistance. Do you have any witnesses? Do you wish to cross-examine the people who have spoken?" I looked at Marcus Sterling. He was leaning back in his chair, smirking. He looked at me with pure disdain. He mouthed the word, "give up." I looked at Bella. She was in the front row of the gallery, her phone propped up on her purse. She was live streaming. I could see the reflection of the comments scrolling on her screen. "Poor girl. She looks homeless. The family is so strong." "Ms. Fairbanks," the judge repeated, a hint of impatience creeping in. "If you do not respond, I will have to assume you are unable to participate in your own defense." I stood up slowly. I kept my posture hunched. I gripped the edge of the table as if I needed it for support. I started, my voice barely a whisper. "Speak up, please," the judge said. I don't have a lawyer," I stammered, looking at Sterling. He said I didn't need one. He said it would be easy." Sterling chuckled audibly. "Your Honor, I merely informed her of the process. I did not advise her." "She doesn't even know where she is," Sylvia whispered loud enough for the press to hear. The judge took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at the clock. It was almost lunchtime. He wanted this done. "Ms. Fairbanks, based on the evidence presented and your lack of defense, the court is inclined to agree with the petitioners," the judge said. He reached for his gavel. "It is clear that for your own safety and the security of the estate." The room seemed to hold its breath. Richard leaned forward, his eyes hungry. Sylvia clasped her hands together in victory. Bella zoomed in on my face, eager to capture the moment of my total defeat for her followers. They saw a girl who had lost. They saw a victim. I looked at the judge. I saw his hand hovering over the gavel. I saw the future they had planned for me, a locked room, a drugged haze. a slow death while they sailed on my money. And then, I let the mask fall. It was not a physical action. I didn't take off my costume. I simply changed my posture. I straightened my spine, unfolding from the hunched, scared creature into the woman who had built a consulting empire from nothing. I lifted my chin. I looked directly at Judge Holloway, my eyes clearing of all confusion, replaced by a gaze of absolute razor-sharp clarity. The shift was so sudden, so palpable, that the judge paused. His hand stopped in midair. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was not a whisper anymore. It was not the scratchy, scared voice of the girl in the deposition. It was the voice of a senior partner. It was resonant, controlled, and commanding. It projected to the back of the room without a microphone. "Before you rule," I said, "I believe there is a procedural question regarding representation that must be addressed." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of pity. It was the silence of shock. Marcus Sterling sat up straight, his smirk vanishing. Richard frowned, confusion clouding his face. "You said you have no lawyer," the judge said, narrowing his eyes. "I said I did not bring a lawyer," I corrected him, my diction precise. "I did not say I was unrepresented." "I don't understand," the judge said. "Who is representing you?" I reached into the canvas tote bag. I did not pull out a tissue. I pulled out a pair of rimless glasses, my real glasses, and put them on. Then I pulled out a heavy, leather-bound case file. I looked at Marcus Sterling. I looked at Richard. I looked at Sylvia. And finally, I looked into the lens of Bella's camera, ensuring that 2 million people would see exactly what happened next. "At the $3.6 million hearing," I said, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls, "they told you I cannot live alone. They told you I'm a danger to myself. They asked you for my lawyer's name." I stepped out from behind the table. I walked into the center of the well, standing toe-to-toe with Marcus Sterling. "I am Lillian Fairbanks," I declared, "senior partner and co-founder of Aegis Consulting, and I am representing myself." The gasp from the gallery was audible, but the sound that gave me the most pleasure was the sharp intake of breath from my father. It sounded like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. "And Your Honor," I continued, turning back to the judge, "I am not here to defend my sanity. I am here to prosecute a decade of fraud." I gestured to the back of the courtroom. The double doors swung open. Elias Thorne walked in. He was not walking with a cane. He was walking with the stride of a titan. He carried a box of evidence labeled Fairbanks Pharma. Judge Holloway's jaw dropped. "Justice Thorne." "Hello, Fred?" Elias said, his voice dry as dust. "I believe my client has the floor." I turned back to my family. The color had drained from Richard's face. Sylvia looked like she was about to faint. Sterling was frantically flipping through his papers, realizing he had brought a knife to a nuclear war. "Shall we begin?" I asked. The courtroom was suspended in a vacuum of silence. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster, the moment when the birds stop singing because they sense the tremor in the earth before humans do. Judge Holloway peered over his spectacles, his patience fraying like an old rope. He looked at me, a huddled, gray figure in an oversized cardigan, and then he looked at the clock. He had a lunch appointment. He wanted this tragedy wrapped up in a neat legal bow. "Ms. Fairbanks," the judge said, his voice laced with a weary finality, "I need to know who is representing you. If you cannot provide a name, I will be forced to rule on the motion before me. For your own safety, I will have no choice but to grant the conservatorship to your father." For my own safety. The phrase hung in the air, toxic and sweet. I looked at Richard. He was leaning forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing of the witness stand. His eyes were wide, pleading, not with me, but with the judge to just drop the gavel. He was so close. He could almost feel the weight of the $3.6 million in his offshore account. Sylvia was clutching a tissue to her dry eyes, ready to perform the role of the relieved mother. Bella was zooming in on my face, the red live icon on her phone pulsing like a heartbeat. They were all waiting for the victim to accept her fate. I took a breath. It was a deep, steady inhale that filled my lungs with the stale courtroom air. My brain, which had been simulating the chaotic static of my processing disorder for the last hour, suddenly snapped into high-definition focus. The background hum of the HVAC system, the scratching of pens, the whispers, it all sharpened into a crystal-clear soundscape. I was no longer filtering. I was targeting. I stood up. I did not stand up like the broken girl they had dragged through the mud. I did not use the table for support. I rose with a fluid, predatory grace. My hand went to the buttons of the oversized, moth-eaten gray cardigan I had worn to the deposition and to this hearing. I undid them, one by one, my movements deliberate. "Your Honor," I said. The voice that came out of my throat was not the whisper of a frightened child. It was a contralto of absolute command. It was the voice I used when negotiating settlements with multinational CEOs. It was a voice that did not ask for permission. It took it. I shrugged the cardigan off my shoulders. It slid down my arms and pooled on the floor like a shed skin. Underneath, I was wearing a charcoal three-piece suit, bespoke, tailored in Milan. The fabric was sharkskin wool that caught the light with a subtle, dangerous sheen. The cut was aggressive, emphasizing the sharp lines of my shoulders and the straightness of my spine. I reached up and pulled off the thick, wire-rimmed glasses, tossing them onto the defense table with a clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I ran a hand through my hair, smoothing the pixie cut back, revealing the sharp, angular planes of my face. I was no longer hiding. I turned to look at my family. Richard's mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was as if someone had cut his vocal cords. Sylvia froze, the tissue halfway to her face, her eyes bulging. Bella lowered her phone slightly, her mouth forming a perfect O of shock. But to her credit as a content creator, she kept the camera rolling. I turned back to the judge. Holloway was blinking, trying to reconcile the creature he had seen 5 seconds ago with the woman standing before him now. "You asked for my lawyer's name," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the gallery without a microphone. I walked out from behind the defendant's table. I moved into the center of the well, the space reserved for litigators. I stood 5 feet from Marcus Sterling. I could smell his cologne sandalwood and arrogance, and I could smell the sudden, acrid spike of his sweat. "At this hearing," I continued, gesturing to the plaintiffs, "they told you I cannot live alone. They told you I'm a danger to myself. They told you I am confused, broken, and incompetent." I paused, letting the words hang there. I locked eyes with Richard. He flinched. "They lied." "Your Honor." Marcus Sterling jumped to his feet. His face was flushing a blotchy red. "I object. This theatrics is—" "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Holloway snapped. His curiosity piqued. He looked at me with a new intensity. "Continue. Miss Fairbanks, you were answering my question." "I was," I said. "You asked who represents me." I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. I pulled out a leather card case. I flipped it open and placed it gently on the judge's bench. Next to it, I placed a heavy bound document. "My name is Lillian Fairbanks," I declared, my voice ringing off the mahogany paneling. "I am a graduate of Harvard Law School, summa cum laude. I am a senior partner and the co-founder of Aegis Consulting." The reaction was immediate. A gasp rippled through the courtroom, starting from the back row where the legal journalist sat and washing forward like a wave. Aegis Consulting was not a household name for the average person, but in the legal world, it was a myth. It was the firm you hired when you wanted to destroy a competitor without leaving a fingerprint. It was the firm that handled cleanup for Fortune 100 companies. Marcus Sterling's face was drained of color. He fell back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. He knew. He knew exactly who I was now. He realized he had just tried to hustle a shark in its own ocean. "Aegis," Judge Holloway repeated, picking up my credentials. He looked at the Bar Association card. He looked at the date. He looked at me. You are the silent partner, the one they call the ghost." "I prefer the auditor, Your Honor," I said with a cold smile. And to answer your question, I represent myself. She is lying. The scream came from the witness stand. Richard had stood up, knocking his chair over. He was pointing a trembling finger at me, his face twisted into a mask of panic and rage. She is lying, Richard roared. She is sick. She is crazy. Look at her. She is hallucinating. She thinks she is a lawyer. This is part of her delusion. Sylvia stood up too, grabbing Marcus Sterling's arm. Do something. Tell the judge she is having an episode. Make him stop her. Mr. Fairbanks, sit down. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his belt. I will not sit down, Richard shouted, spit flying from his lips. That is my daughter. She is a mental patient. She washed out of life 12 years ago. She is a fraud. I didn't flinch. I didn't shout back. I simply turned my head slowly and looked at him. I looked at him with the cold, dispassionate gaze of a coroner examining a corpse. A fraud. Richard, I asked softly, but in the sudden silence following his outburst, everyone heard it. I walked back to my table and picked up the thick stack of files I had brought with me. I held them up. You are petitioning for conservatorship based on the claim that I cannot manage $3.6 million, I said, walking toward him. You claim you are the responsible party, the protector. I slammed the first file down on the clerk's desk. The sound echoed like a gavel strike. This, I said, pointing to the file, is a forensic audit of Fairbanks Pharma's internal ledger for the last 5 years. It details 42 separate instances of wire fraud, totaling $4,200,000, diverted from company accounts to a shell corporation in the British Virgin Islands called Orion Holdings. Richard's face went from red to gray. You, I said, pointing at him, are not here to save me. You are insolvent, you are bankrupt, and you are an embezzler. Objection, Sterling squeaked, but his heart wasn't in it. Relevance. The relevance, I said, turning to the judge, is that the petitioner is seeking control of my assets to cover his own felonies. He is not a concerned father. He is a desperate criminal. Lies, Sylvia shrieked. He is a good man. He is a pillar of the community. I picked up the second file. And this, I said, holding up a black folder, is the transcript of a conversation recorded yesterday between myself and Mrs. Sylvia Fairbanks. In it, she admits in her own words to orchestrating my abandonment 12 years ago because I was an embarrassment. She admits that my medical condition was exaggerated. She admits that the goal of this hearing is to seize the trust fund because they deserve it. Sylvia clamped her hand over her mouth. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit. And finally, I said, turning to Bella. Bella was still holding her phone up, but her hands were shaking. The comments on her live stream must have been turning against her, but she was too paralyzed to stop recording. This thumb drive, I said, holding up the small silver device, contains the metadata and recovered video files from Bella Fairbanks's social media accounts. Dating back 12 years, it includes a video where she practices staging the attack she blamed on me, the very incident used to justify my initial sedation. I turned back to the judge. I placed my hands on the bench, leaning in. I am not here to defend my right to live alone. Your Honor, I live in a penthouse on the Upper East Side that I bought with cash earned from consulting fees that Mr. Sterling here could only dream of billing. I am not here to prove I am sane. My sanity is documented by the Ivy League degrees in my vault. I straightened up, smoothing my lapels. I am here to file a cross motion, I announced, for perjury, for fraud, for filing a false instrument with the court, and for the attempted theft of my grandmother's legacy. This is preposterous, Sterling stammered, trying to regain control. Your Honor, these are unverified documents presented by a woman who clearly has delusions of grandeur. We have no proof of who she is. She could have printed those cards anywhere. You want proof? I asked. I smiled. It was the smile Elias had taught me. The smile of the checkmate. I anticipated that my identity might be challenged by those who prefer to see me as a victim. I said, so, I took the liberty of calling a character witness, someone who can vouch for my competency, my career, and my sanity. We have no witness list from the respondent. Sterling protested. It is a hostile witness list, Judge Holloway said, leaning forward, his eyes gleaming. I will allow it. Who is your witness? Ms. Fairbanks. I turned to the double doors at the back of the courtroom. I call the Honorable Elias Thorne. The name sucked the air out of the room. Every lawyer, every clerk, every reporter knew that name. Elias Thorne was not just a retired judge. He was a deity in the state's legal pantheon. He was the Iron Hand. He had not set foot in a courtroom in 5 years. The bailiff opened the doors. Elias walked in. He was wearing his signature 3-piece charcoal suit. He walked with a cane, but he didn't lean on it. He used it like a scepter. His white hair was swept back, his face stern and unreadable. He walked down the center aisle. The crowd parted for him instinctively. He walked past Bella, who shrank back into her seat. He walked past Sylvia, who was trembling. He walked past Richard, who looked as if he had seen a ghost. Elias stopped at the gate. He looked at Judge Holloway. Justice Thorne, Holloway said, his voice respectful, almost reverent. I was not aware you were involved in this matter. I am not involved, Frederick, Elias said, his voice deep and gravelly, carrying the weight of 1,000 judgments. I am merely an observer and a mentor. He turned and looked at me. For the first time in public, his face softened into a look of profound pride. I am here to confirm, Elias said to the court, that Lillian Fairbanks is not only of sound mind, but she possesses one of the finest legal minds I have ever had the privilege of training. She has been my associate, my partner, and my family for 12 years. Elias turned his gaze to Marcus Sterling. And if you wish to challenge her competency, counselor, you will have to cross-examine me first. Sterling sat down. He slumped. He knew it was over. You do not cross-examine Elias Thorne. You apologize and you run. Thank you, Justice Thorne, Judge Holloway said. He looked at Richard. His expression had shifted from pity to disgust. Mr. Fairbanks, I suggest you sit down and consult with your attorney, immediately. I stood there, in the center of the storm I had summoned. The camera flashes from the press were going off like strobe lights now. The reporters were typing furiously. Heiress revealed as legal genius, family exposed. I looked at Richard one last time. He was slumped in the witness chair, a broken man. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw the recognition. He finally saw me. He didn't see the broken girl at the bus stop. He saw the executioner. You were right, Dad, I said, my voice low. Just for him. I am a danger, but not to myself. I turned back to the judge. I am ready to proceed with the evidence, Your Honor. The courtroom was no longer a place of judgment for me. It was an operating theater, and I was the surgeon holding the scalpel. The silence that had descended upon the room after Elias Thorne's entrance was heavy, electric, and terrified. Richard Fairbanks sat in the witness box, but he looked more like a man strapped into an electric chair waiting for the switch to be thrown. I walked toward him. My heels clicked against the floor tiles with a rhythmic, military precision. I stopped 3 feet away, close enough to see the sweat pooling in the wrinkles of his forehead, close enough to smell the acrid scent of his fear. Mr. Fairbanks, I began, my voice calm and conversational, which only made it more terrifying. Let us return to the subject of my grandmother's trust. You stated under oath that your desire to control these funds is rooted solely in a concern for my well-being. Is that correct? Richard licked his lips. He looked at Marcus Sterling for help, but Sterling was busy burying his face in a file, pretending to read. Yes, Richard croaked. I am your father. A touching sentiment, I said. However, according to the forensic audit of Fairbanks Pharma that I have just entered into evidence as Exhibit B, your company is facing a liquidity crisis. Specifically, there is a loan of $4 million due to Liberty National Bank on the 15th of this month. That is next week. Is that correct? Business cycles fluctuate, Richard stammered. It is standard corporate finance. Standard corporate finance does not typically involve the diversion of employee pension funds into a shell company called Orion Holdings, I countered, holding up a spreadsheet. I have here a transaction log showing a wire transfer of $250,000 from the employee 401k match program to Orion Holdings on February 3rd, another for $100,000 on March 10th. And curiously, Orion Holdings pays the mortgage on your Connecticut estate. It pays for your country club membership. It even pays for the lease on the Mercedes you drove to the bus station 12 years ago. The gallery murmured. The press was typing furiously. That is an accounting error, Richard said, his voice rising in panic. My CFO handles that. Your CFO resigned 6 months ago because he refused to sign the audit, I said, dropping the bombshell. I have his resignation email here. He cites, and I quote, systematic embezzlement. Now, Mr. Fairbanks, simple addition tells me that you are currently underwater by approximately $3.8 million. If you do not pay the bank next week, you lose the company, you lose the house, you go to prison. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper that the microphone picked up perfectly. You didn't find me to save me, did you? You found me because I am the only asset you have left to liquidate. You plan to take the $3.6 million from my trust, funnel it into Orion Holdings, and plug the hole in your sinking ship before the auditors arrived. No, Richard shouted, gripping the railing. That is a lie, I love you. Love? I repeated the word as if it were a foreign object. Let us talk about love, and let us talk about your wife, Sylvia. I turned to the clerk. Please play Exhibit C. I nodded to the technician I had bribed earlier with a smile and a professional request. He hit play on the audio file I had recorded in the Bronx apartment. Sylvia's voice, clear and sharp, filled the courtroom. God, why couldn't you just stay gone? Why did we have to drag you back out of the gutter? I told Richard that night at the bus station that we should have driven you further away. The gasps from the audience were audible. Sylvia, sitting in the front row, went pale. She looked like a statue made of ash. The recording continued. You called me trash. Today. The trash buries you. That was my voice on the tape. And then Sylvia's reply. The nail in her coffin, I told him to leave you where no one would find you. But Richard has a soft spot. He gave you money. Didn't he? $50. More than you were worth. The audio cut out. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of 200 people realizing they were looking at monsters. I turned back to Richard. $50, I said. That was the price of your daughter. That was the severance package for 16 years of fatherhood. Do you deny that it is your wife's voice? Do you deny that you left a minor child at a bus station in the middle of winter with no coat? Richard put his head in his hands. He was sobbing now, but they were the ugly, heaving sobs of a man who knows he is ruined. I didn't want to, he wailed. She made me. She said you were dangerous. Ah, yes, I said. The danger, mental illness. I walked back to my table and picked up the medical file. You have claimed for 12 years that I suffer from schizophrenia. You used Dr. Vance's diagnosis to justify drugging me and eventually discarding me. But Dr. Vance kept 2 sets of books, didn't he? Just like you? I held up the yellowed, handwritten notes. This is the original clinical observation log from Dr. Vance, obtained from his personal archives, dated January 12th, the day of my removal. It reads, Subject exhibits no signs of psychosis. Cognitive functions are hyperacute. Auditory processing disorder is present but manageable. Father insists on sedation to appease stepmother. Ethical violation noted, but payment received. I slammed the file down on the railing of the witness box. Richard flinched as if I had hit him. I was never sick, I said, my voice ringing with 12 years of suppressed rage. It was inconvenient. I was the variable that didn't fit in your perfect equation. So you tried to erase me, but you forgot one thing about numbers. Richard, they don't disappear. They accumulate. Objection. Marcus Sterling stood up, but his voice was weak. Your Honor, this is This is ambushing the witness. I spun around to face him. This is impeachment, Mr. Sterling, and if you had done your due diligence instead of counting your commission on a yacht purchase, you would know that. Furthermore, under the rules of professional conduct, continuing to advocate for a client you know is committing perjury makes you an accessory. Do you really want to lose your license today? Sterling looked at me. He looked at the judge, whose face was a mask of thunder. He looked at the press. Sterling stammered. He grabbed his briefcase. Your Honor, in light of new information, I must request to withdraw as counsel immediately. I cannot represent these clients. Granted, Judge Holloway barked. Sit down and be quiet, or I will hold you in contempt. Sterling collapsed into his chair, defeated. I was not done. I turned my eyes to the gallery, to the front row, to Bella. She was still holding her phone, but she had lowered it to her lap. She was staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. The live stream, however, was still running. And now for the final plaintiff, I said, Bella. I picked up the remote for the courtroom monitor. You built a career on being the perfect, tragic sister, I said. You told your 2 million followers that you were the victim of my madness. You monetized my absence. You sold t-shirts with the slogan, Survivor. I clicked the button. The screen on the wall flickered to life. It showed the video I had recovered from the depths of her deleted archives. It was Bella at 14, holding the scissors. The smirk on her face was high definition. Watch this. I am going to make it look like she attacked me. It is going to be Oscar-worthy. Then, the screen changed. It showed a series of credit card statements and DMs from Bella's account. My dad's dumb company card is unlimited. I just bought Louboutins. I will just say the maid stole the number. Or better yet, I will blame the freak. Dad believes anything I say about her. I looked at Bella. Your followers are watching this. Bella, I checked the feed before I stood up. You are losing 1,000 subscribers a second. The sponsors are already emailing your agency. You didn't just lose your sister today. You lost your brand. You are canceled. Bella let out a high-pitched scream and threw her phone on the floor. She buried her face in her hands. The live stream ended, but the internet would preserve that moment forever. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I said, the petitioners came here to prove I was incompetent. Instead, I have proven they are criminals. I have proven that the emergency petition was filed in bad faith to facilitate grand larceny. I have proven that Richard Fairbanks, Sylvia Fairbanks, and Bella Fairbanks conspired to defraud this court. Richard, seeing the walls closing in, seeing the bailiff moving toward him, played his final card. He clutched his chest. He gasped for air. He slumped forward over the railing, his face contorted. My heart, he groaned. I can't breathe. Help me. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Sylvia screamed. He is having a heart attack. Call 911. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood over him, watching the performance. I checked my watch. His breathing rate was elevated, but his color was returning, not fading. He was hyperventilating, not arresting. Do not call an ambulance, I said, my voice cutting through the panic. Are you insane? Sylvia shrieked. He is dying. He is not dying, I said coldly. He is acting, just like he acted the part of the grieving father for 12 years. Look at his hands. He is gripping the rail. If he were having a cardiac event, he would lose motor control. Look at his eyes. He is checking to see if the judge is buying it. I leaned down close to Richard's ear. You can drop the act. Dad, the curtain has fallen. There is no encore. Richard stopped gasping. He looked up at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. The ruse collapsed. He straightened up, realizing that even his body couldn't lie to me. Judge Holloway banged his gavel. The sound was like a gunshot. Order, he shouted. Order in this court. The room fell silent. I have heard enough, Judge Holloway said. His voice was shaking with suppressed rage. In 30 years on the bench, I have never witnessed such a grotesque display of deceit. He looked at Richard, who was now sitting in the witness box. defeated and sullen. "The petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice," the judge ruled. "Ms. Lillian Fairbanks is clearly competent, legally astute, and the sole rightful owner of the trust established by her grandmother. The funds are to be released to her control immediately." He paused, glaring at the plaintiffs. "Furthermore, based on the evidence presented, the admission of wire fraud, the confession of child abandonment, and the blatant perjury committed in my courtroom, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office. Bailiff, take Mr. Richard Fairbanks and Mrs. Sylvia Fairbanks into custody pending charges of fraud, embezzlement, and filing a false instrument." "No," Sylvia screamed as the bailiff moved in. "You can't. We are Fairbanks." "Not anymore," I said softly. Two officers moved toward the gallery. They pulled Sylvia from her seat. She kicked and screamed, her dignity evaporating. Another officer pulled Richard from the witness box. He didn't fight. He looked broken. He looked old. As they cuffed Richard, he looked at me one last time. "Lillian," he pleaded, "I am your father. Please." I looked at him. I felt nothing. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. There was only a hollow space where a family should have been. "I request an immediate and permanent restraining order against all three petitioners," I said to the judge. "I want them nowhere near me, my home, or my assets." "Granted," Judge Holloway said. 500 yards, permanent." I watched as they were led away. The press was in a frenzy, snapping photos of the perfect family being dragged out in handcuffs. It was the photo of the year. I gathered my files. I put my glasses back in my pocket. I picked up my coat. Bella was left standing alone in the front row. Her parents were gone. Her phone was broken on the floor. Her career was dead. She looked small. She looked like a child playing dress-up in clothes she couldn't afford. She looked at me. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Lillian," she sobbed. "Lillian, wait. I didn't know. Mom and Dad made me. Please, I have nowhere to go. They took the cards. I have no money." She took a step toward me, reaching out a hand. "Help me, sissy. Please, I am your sister." I stopped. I looked at her hand, the same hand that had held the scissors, the same hand that had typed the lies that destroyed my childhood. I didn't slap her. I didn't scream at her. That would have required an emotional investment I was no longer willing to make. I simply looked at her as if she were a stranger asking for change on the subway. "I don't have a sister," I said. I turned my back on her. I walked toward Elias, who was waiting by the doors with a proud smile on his face. "Ready to go, counselor?" Elias asked. "Yes," I said. "I believe we have a closing statement to write." I walked out of the courtroom, leaving the ruins of the House of Fairbanks behind me. I didn't look back. There was nothing there worth seeing. The silence that followed the verdict was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of a decade of noise finally ceasing. The courtroom doors had closed behind me, shutting out the chaos of the press, the flashing bulbs, and the ruined dynasty of the Fairbanks family. For the first time in 12 years, the static in my head was gone. There was no hum of anxiety, no delay in processing the world. Everything was crystal clear. The media storm that followed was predictable. The tabloids were ravenous. They wanted the story of the genius heiress who had risen from the ashes to destroy her own parents. They camped outside the Aegis Consulting Building. They sent drones to hover near my penthouse balcony. They offered six-figure sums for an exclusive interview. "Tell us about the abuse," they begged. "Tell us how it feels to send your father to prison." I declined them all. I did not give a single quote. I did not sit on a sofa opposite a sympathetic talk show host and cry for ratings. I remained exactly what I had always been to them, a ghost. I let the court transcripts speak for me. My silence was not a retreat this time. It was a boundary. I had spent 12 years building a fortress around my life, and I was not about to lower the drawbridge for the entertainment of the masses. The fall of the House of Fairbanks was swift, brutal, and public. It was a slow-motion demolition that I watched from a distance, not with glee, but with the dispassionate observation of an auditor reviewing a bankrupt ledger. Fairbanks Pharma collapsed within 48 hours of the hearing. The revelation of the wire fraud and the embezzlement triggered an immediate freeze of all assets. The bank called in the $4 million loan. The SEC launched a raid on the headquarters. The stock price, which had been artificially inflated by Richard's lies, plummeted to pennies. The company that my father had built on a foundation of deceit was sold for scrap parts to a competitor. The mansion in Connecticut, the stage for so much of my childhood trauma, met a similar fate. The bank foreclosed on the property before the month was out. I saw a listing for the auction online. The description boasted of the grand foyer and the chef's kitchen, failing to mention that the foyer was where a teenage girl had been slapped for drinking water, or that the kitchen was where a stepmother had plotted to erase a child. It was bought by a tech developer who planned to bulldoze it and subdivide the land. I found that fitting. The earth would be scrubbed clean. And Bella. My sister learned the hard way that influence is not a currency you can bank, with her reputation destroyed and her parents awaiting trial. The credit cards stopped working. The friends who had partied on her father's dime vanished. I heard through the grapevine my network is extensive that she had been evicted from her luxury apartment in the city. A few weeks later, I was walking past a mid-range diner 2 blocks from the courthouse. I looked through the window. There she was. Bella was wearing a polyester uniform that was a size too big, wiping down a sticky table. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. No extensions, no blowout. A customer yelled at her for forgetting his coffee refill. Bella didn't snap back. She didn't film him. She just apologized. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. She was learning, finally, what it meant to earn $1. I didn't go in. I didn't offer to save her. Some lessons must be lived to be learned. As for the money, the $3,600,000 that had started this war, I did not buy a yacht. I did not buy jewelry. I did not even invest it in the market. I used every cent of the principal and the interest to establish the Fairbanks Foundation. It was an ironic name. I knew. My father would hate it. He would hate that his name was being used to fund the very thing he had tried to destroy. The foundation had a single, laser-focused mission to provide top-tier legal representation and forensic accounting services, pro bono, to minors and young adults who were being financially exploited or abused by their guardians. We set up shop in a brownstone in Brooklyn. I hired 3 young lawyers who were hungry for justice, not money. I hired a forensic accountant who reminded me of myself at 22, quiet, obsessive, and brilliant. We became the shield for the kids who had been told they were crazy, the kids who had been told they were ungrateful, the kids who were being erased by the people who were supposed to protect them. It was a Tuesday night, 3 months after the verdict, when my phone rang. I was in my study, reviewing a case file for a 19-year-old boy whose parents had spent his acting earnings on gambling debts. The number on my screen was unknown. My security protocols usually blocked these calls, but this one had bypassed the filter, likely using a burner application. I hesitated, then answered. I didn't speak. I just listened. Lillian. The voice was ragged. It sounded like it had been dragged through gravel. It was Richard. He was out on bail, awaiting his sentencing hearing next week. The charges were severe. He was looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Lillian, please don't hang up, he begged. I had to borrow a phone. Sylvia left me. She is testifying against me for a reduced sentence. She is blaming it all on me. I said nothing. I imagined him alone in some cheap motel room, the walls closing in. I just wanted to hear your voice, he said, and I could hear the tears. I am scared. Lily, I am an old man. I can't go to prison. You can stop this. You have the foundation. You have influence. If you wrote a letter to the judge, if you asked for leniency, they would listen to you. He paused, waiting for the daughter who used to seek his approval to surface. I am your father, he whispered. Doesn't that mean anything? I looked at the file on my desk. I looked at the photo of the 19-year-old boy who had attempted suicide because his parents told him he was worthless. It means you should have known better, I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the jagged edges of anger. Lillian, please, he sobbed. I can't live like this. I have nothing. I am nobody. You are not nobody. Richard, I said, you are a defendant, and next week you will be a number. How can you be so cold? He cried. We are family. We are supposed to live for each other. You were right about one thing, I said, leaning back in my leather chair. You told the court I could not live with normal people. You were right. I cannot. I live at a level of integrity that you will never reach. You are looking for a daughter who died at a bus station 12 years ago. You are speaking to the woman who survived her. Lily. Goodbye, Richard, I said. Wait, you can't just… I pressed the end call button, then I blocked the number. Then I contacted my security team to flag the burner ID. It took 5 seconds. It was effortless. I stood up and walked out to the terrace. The night air was cool, signaling the end of spring. Elias Thorne was sitting at the iron table, pouring tea from a silver pot. He looked frail tonight, the toll of the trial having aged him, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He looked up as I approached. He saw the expression on my face. He knew. Richard, he asked. Richard, I confirmed. I sat down opposite him. He wanted a character reference. Elias snorted, a dry, unamused sound. The audacity of the desperate. What did you tell him? I told him the truth, I said. That we exist in different worlds now. Elias handed me a cup of tea. Earl Grey. Just like the first cup he had given me when I woke up on his sofa 12 years ago. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the lights of Manhattan blink on, a galaxy of artificial stars. Do you feel it? Elias asked softly. Feel what? Happiness, he said. The dragons are slain. The castle is yours. The treasure is reclaimed. Is this what happiness feels like to you, Lillian? I looked down at the city. I thought about the word happiness. It felt too light, too fleeting. Happiness was a birthday cake or a sunny day. What I felt was heavier. It was solid. It was the feeling of a foundation that could no longer be shaken. No, I said, meeting his gaze. It is not happiness, Elias. It is freedom. I took a sip of the tea. Happiness is an emotion. Freedom is a state of being. For 12 years, I was running, even when I was standing still. My mind was running. I was calculating threats, analyzing exits, preparing for the blow. Tonight, my mind is quiet. I am not looking over my shoulder. I have reclaimed my name. I have reclaimed my mind. I have reclaimed myself. Elias nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. And what will you do with this freedom? My dear, you could retire. You have enough money to vanish to an island and never look at a ledger again. I laughed. It was a genuine sound, bubbling up from my chest. Retire, I am 28, Elias, and the world is full of Richards and Sylvias. I put the cup down. I looked at the skyline, thinking of all the lit windows, all the secrets hidden behind curtains, all the children who were waiting for someone to notice that they were drowning. I don't want to rest, I said. I want to work. The Fairbanks Foundation is just the beginning. I am going to dismantle them. Elias, every corrupt guardianship, every stolen trust fund, every parent who treats a child like an ATM, I am going to find them, and I am going to end them. Revenge is a thirsty business, Elias warned gently. It is not revenge anymore, I corrected him. Revenge is personal. Revenge is petty. This is justice, and justice is my profession. I stood up and walked to the edge of the balcony. The wind whipped through my short hair. I felt powerful. Not the power of money or status, but the power of competency. The power of knowing that no matter what they threw at me, I could decode it, analyze it, and dismantle it. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the survivor. I turned back to Elias, who was watching me with the pride of a father who had actually done the job. I am the guardian, I said. I turned back to the view. The city was vast, noisy, and chaotic, but to me, it was just a data set waiting to be organized. They had thrown me into the storm, hoping I would drown. They had stripped me of my coat and my dignity and left me to freeze. They did not know that the cold preserves. They did not know that the pressure of the deep ocean creates diamonds. They hoped I would die. Instead, I learned to breathe underwater, and when I finally rose to the surface, I did not come back as a ripple. I came back from a tsunami, and now that the waters had receded, and the debris of their lives had been washed away, I was finally standing on solid ground. I walked back into the apartment, past the tea, past the view. I went to my desk. I opened the file of the 19-year-old boy. I picked up my pen. There was work to do. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a long journey from that frozen bus station to the boardroom, and I am grateful you stayed with me until the end. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a quiet room like mine? Or are you on your own journey somewhere in the world? Please let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the Family Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear that they too can survive the storm. Stay strong, and remember you are never as alone as they want you to believe.